Mark and Jamie never imagined one daring heist would change their lives forever. In the dead of night, two brothers stole 30 kilograms of Class A drugs from a Liverpool stash house, thinking they could outsmart everyone. But in a city where secrets never stay hidden, their audacity would come at a price they could never escape. Liverpool had always been a city of shadows. Its streets carried a quiet hum of life. But beneath the surface, the kind of secrets that could ruin lives thrived. Mark and Jamie, two brothers in their early 30s, had grown up knowing those shadows well. They were not strangers to crime. Petty thefts, occasional break-ins, and minor scams had filled their youth. But desperation has a way of pushing people further than they ever imagined. And on a stormy night that would change everything, the brothers would cross a line they could never return from. The opportunity had come to them unexpectedly. A stash house on the outskirts of the city, a warehouse surrounded by industrial units and the faint smell of damp concrete, held enough Class A drugs to change their lives forever. 30 kilograms of cocaine, worth hundreds of thousands on the streets, sat in a room that was at first glance impenetrable. But nothing is truly untouchable. Mark and Jamie spent weeks watching, waiting, and learning every routine. They memorized the times when the guard left his post, the way deliveries arrived and disappeared, and even the faint sound of a distant CCTV camera clicking into position. Every detail mattered, and every misstep could mean prison, or worse. The night they chose was a perfect storm. Rain battered the rooftops, turning streets slick and reflective. Fog rolled in from the Mersey, cloaking the city in a ghostly haze. In those conditions, anonymity was their ally. Mark wore a dark jacket, hood pulled low over his eyes, while Jamie moved with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this countless times. They approached the warehouse cautiously, avoiding puddles that could betray their presence, and slipped through a side entrance that had been poorly secured. Inside, the smell of damp wood and chemical residue hit them, but they didn't hesitate. Their eyes found the stash immediately. 30 kilos of cocaine, neatly packaged, stacked like bricks, glimmering under the faint overhead lights. What followed was rapid, almost mechanical. They worked together silently, loading bags into a stolen van parked just outside. Adrenaline coursed through their veins. For a few minutes, it felt like they were invincible, untouchable. The heist was perfect, or so they thought. In their haste, they overlooked a small, unassuming surveillance camera tucked in a corner. A camera that, when they were gone, would record every detail, a silent witness to their crime. Once the van was loaded, they melted back into the foggy streets of Liverpool. The rain washed over them, leaving no footprints, no evidence of their passage. But beneath the thrill, a quiet unease settled. The brothers had stolen from people who were not known for forgiveness. Every street corner, every alley they passed, reminded them that someone somewhere would notice. And when that happened, there would be no turning back. The next morning, the city awoke to its usual rhythm, oblivious to the chaos that had unfolded under its nose. Mark and Jamie, on the other hand, found themselves caught between exhilaration and fear. They had imagined the wealth the cocaine would bring, the freedom from debts and dead-end jobs. But they had not imagined the weight of knowing that they were now marked. Every knock on a door, every stranger's glance, became a potential threat. They moved cautiously, hiding the van and transferring the stolen goods to more secure locations. Each decision felt like walking a tightrope, one misstep away from disaster. Despite their careful planning, cracks began to appear almost immediately. One bag was heavier than expected. One streetlight flickered suspiciously as they passed. The adrenaline that had carried them through the heist now made their minds race with possibilities of being caught. Even the small acts of auto life, buying groceries, refueling the van, or paying for a coffee, became exercises in paranoia. They were ghosts moving among the living, and every choice carried consequence. For Mark and Jamie, the heist represented more than money. It was a test of skill, courage, and audacity. It was proof that they could outsmart a system designed to catch people like them. But what they could not know was that the system, and the criminals they had stolen from, had long memories. A single misstep, one overlooked camera, or one suspicious transaction would be enough to unravel everything. And as the rain continued to fall over Liverpool, soaking the streets and masking their tracks, the brothers could not shake the sense that this night, exhilarating as it was, had set in motion a chain of events they could never control. In those first hours after the theft, the city remained unaware, but the shadows had already begun to shift. And somewhere, behind locked doors and silent alarms, someone had already noticed that 30 kilograms of cocaine had disappeared, and the hunt had quietly begun. The aftermath of the heist was a strange kind of freedom. Mark and Jamie had the cocaine in their possession, and for a brief moment, it felt like nothing could touch them. The city of Liverpool stretched out before them, oblivious to the storm that had just passed through its streets. They rented a small nondescript flat on the outskirts, a place that would serve as a temporary haven. Every detail was considered: fake names, minimal contact with neighbors, and a careful pattern of movements designed to avoid drawing attention. For a while, the plan worked. The brothers quickly discovered that having stolen the drugs was one thing, but converting them into cash was a completely different challenge. They avoided traditional dealers at first, instead relying on a few trusted contacts who operated in the shadows. Every transaction was tense, each handoff a gamble. They counted bills late into the night, their apartment filled with the faint scent of damp carpet and chemicals. The piles of cash were intoxicating, but the pressure of hiding from the law and the criminal network they had stolen from weighed heavily on them. As days turned into weeks, life on the run began to take its toll. Mark became increasingly restless, pacing the flat for hours, constantly scanning the windows and listening for any hint of danger. Jamie, quieter but no less vigilant, checked doors, windows, and locks multiple times a day, often muttering to himself about patterns in the city's noise. Every unexpected sound, a car engine revving, footsteps in the stairwell, a door slamming in the distance, set their hearts racing. They had stolen from people who were not known for mercy, and they knew that at any moment, someone could come looking for retribution. Paranoia began to seep into even their simplest routines. A delivery driver, ringing the buzzer, would send them ducking behind furniture. The hum of a police siren in the distance became a trigger, making them hold their breath until it passed. Even the most mundane activities, like buying groceries or filling the car with petrol, became exercises in careful observation. They avoided crowded areas, changed routes, and always had an escape plan. Sleep was a luxury, replaced by a constant, gnawing tension that refused to lift. The criminal network they had stolen from was not slow to respond. Rumors spread quickly through the city's underworld, reaching corners of Liverpool where no law enforcement would ever venture. Names were whispered in back alleys, threats were passed through intermediaries, and suddenly, every familiar face seemed suspect. The brothers realized that their survival depended not just on avoiding the police, but also on navigating a dangerous game with those far more ruthless than themselves. Trust became impossible, and alliances felt fragile. Despite their caution, cracks began to appear in their careful strategy. One night, a knock at the door left both brothers frozen. It was a delivery driver, just as usual, but the timing was too precise, too deliberate. They watched him leave before deciding to step outside, hearts still racing. In their minds, the line between friend and foe blurred. They knew the longer they remained in the city, the greater the risk of discovery. To cope with the stress, the brothers tried to immerse themselves in their new lifestyle. They sold small portions of the cocaine, carefully selecting buyers and always insisting on cash transactions. Each sale brought a surge of adrenaline and relief, but it also amplified the danger. The more people who knew about the drugs, the higher the chance that someone would talk. Every transaction carried the unspoken threat of betrayal, and the brothers learned quickly that even the smallest mistake could be fatal. The psychological toll was immense. Mark's confidence was slowly eroding, replaced by suspicion and sleepless nights. Jamie, who had always been methodical and cautious, found himself calculating risks in every waking moment, questioning every shadow. Together, They existed in a state of constant vigilance, a fragile balance between success and disaster. Every decision, no matter how trivial, was weighed against the potential for exposure. Yet, amidst the fear, there was an undeniable thrill. The rush of having outsmarted everyone, of holding power in their hands, was addictive. For a fleeting moment, the brothers could almost forget the danger, imagine a life of wealth and freedom, and believe that they had beaten the system. But deep down, both knew that luck could not last forever. The city had a way of revealing secrets, and sooner or later, the past would catch up. Weeks passed, and the tension only grew. Every visit to the corner shop, every car passing their flat, every phone call became a source of anxiety. Mark and Jamie had crossed a line that could never be erased, and as the fog rolled in over Liverpool streets once more, the brothers understood that their choices had set them on a path from which there might be no return. The thrill of freedom had been replaced by the constant shadow of fear, a fear that would only deepen in the days to come. The city of Liverpool remained largely unaware of the heist, but for the police, the storm had already begun to form. At first, there was little evidence to work with. The stash house showed few signs of forced entry beyond the broken locks, and witnesses were scarce. Whoever had stolen 30 kilograms of cocaine had been careful, deliberate, and ruthless in their efficiency. It was as if the drugs had vanished into thin air. Detectives began to fear that this was the work of professionals, people who understood the city's underworld better than anyone else. Yet even the most meticulous criminals leave traces. A single surveillance camera, tucked away on a quiet street near the warehouse, captured two figures slipping into the fog. The footage was grainy, barely more than shadows moving in the night, but experienced eyes could see patterns. The detectives watched it repeatedly, noting the builds, the gait, the way the figures moved. It was not much, but it was enough to start piecing together a profile. Investigators began digging into every lead, however small. They traced unusual bank transfers, sudden withdrawals, and purchases that didn't align with known incomes. A luxury car seen near the outskirts of the city, registered under a false name, raised more questions than answers. Slowly, a picture emerged. Two men, brothers, methodical and daring, who had vanished with a fortune they had no right to possess. The investigation took a surprising turn when one of the brothers made a critical mistake. Mark, overconfident from their initial success, had reached out to someone in the criminal network, attempting to sell information about the stash in exchange for more money. It was a desperate act, a gamble that seemed harmless at the time, but it provided the police with a thread, a connection that had been previously invisible. Every message, every transfer, every cautious word now became a breadcrumb trail leading directly back to them. The detectives coordinated surveillance around the brothers' known associates, watching and waiting for a single misstep. They monitored phone calls, scanned digital communications, and used a network of informants in the city witness, and the pattern of these interactions was easier to track than they had anticipated. Each new lead reinforced what the surveillance footage had already suggested. The men were clever, but not infallible, daring but human. For the first time, the investigators began to feel a sense of inevitability. The web was closing in, and even the smallest mistake by Mark or Jamie could unravel their entire operation. They mapped every transaction, traced every route, and prepared for the moment when the brothers would be forced to step into a trap. The city itself, with its foggy streets and hidden alleys, became a character in the pursuit, concealing and revealing in equal measure. And then, a shock came from an unexpected direction. A minor accomplice, someone who had been trusted by the brothers, turned out to be an informant. Their betrayal was subtle at first. A casual mention, a tip about movements, an offhand comment that drew attention. But for the detectives, it was enough. It confirmed suspicions, narrowed down addresses, and provided a timeline for a possible arrest. Mark and Jamie were no longer invisible. Every step was being watched, every decision scrutinized. The investigation was meticulous, a careful chess game played between law enforcement and criminals who believed they were untouchable. As weeks passed, the tension in the city's underworld escalated. Rumors of betrayal and surveillance spread among those connected to the stolen drugs. The brothers, still unaware of the full extent of the hunt, moved cautiously. But every precaution now felt insufficient. They were surrounded by unseen eyes, and the realization that their freedom had limits began to seep in. By the time the detectives were ready to act, the net was complete. Every movement had been predicted, every possible escape route accounted for, and every risk minimized. Liverpool had become a city of shadows again, but this time, the shadows were not hiding the criminals, they were hiding the hunters. The stage was set, and soon Mark and Jamie would discover that no amount of planning, paranoia, or courage could outrun the consequences of their audacity. The raid came quietly, almost deceptively so. Mark and Jamie had grown accustomed to the rhythm of fear, alert to every creak of a floorboard and every passing car. Yet on that gray morning, they were caught entirely off guard. Police officers moved with silent precision, surrounding the flat, while their informants ensured there were no surprises. No sirens, no shouting, just a calm, calculated presence that shattered the fragile illusion of control the brothers had clung to for weeks. Inside the flat, Mark was the first to notice something was wrong. A subtle shift in the atmosphere. A faint reflection in the window, the shadow of movement outside, set his instincts on high alert. Jamie's careful checks had failed to reveal the perimeter the authorities had established. Before they could react, officers were already moving in, doors opening with quiet authority. The brothers froze, realizing instantly that there was no escape. Every route they had planned, every contingency they had imagined, had been anticipated and neutralized. The recovery of the stolen drugs was swift. Officers found the cocaine hidden in clever, but not foolproof locusts throughout the flat and nearby storage areas. Not all of it was recovered. Some had been sold, some carefully stashed in locations the police would only discover later, but enough was found to leave no doubt about the crime. The evidence was overwhelming: bags marked with identifiable packaging, chemical residues, and detailed ledgers of transactions. Mark and Jamie were escorted out in handcuffs, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. The arrest did not bring relief, only a crushing sense of inevitability. For weeks, the brothers had believed themselves untouchable, their careful planning a shield against both law enforcement and the criminal network they had stolen from. Now, that illusion lay in pieces. The city that had once seemed vast and forgiving now felt like a cage, and every corner, every street, reminded them of the risks they had taken. Once in custody, the legal process moved quickly. The court proceedings were methodical, presenting the evidence piece by piece. CCTV footage, bank records, and testimonies from buyers and informants painted a clear picture of the heist and its aftermath. The prosecution emphasized the calculated nature of the theft, highlighting the months of planning, the deliberate targeting of a high-value stash, and the subsequent distribution of the drugs. The defense, limited in options, tried to frame the brothers' actions as impulsive rather than premeditated. But the weight of the evidence was undeniable. The sentencing brought another layer of consequences. Beyond imprisonment, the court imposed a financial penalty designed to reflect the value of the stolen drugs. Mark and Jamie were ordered to repay $80,080 authorities or face additional prison time. The sum represented more than just money. It symbolized the gravity of their crime and the inescapable reality that theft comes with a cost far beyond immediate punishment. It was a number that would haunt them long after their release, a constant reminder of the risks they had taken and the empire they had dared to challenge. While the court addressed the legal consequences, the underworld continued to stir. News of the arrest spread quickly, reaching corners of Liverpool where whispers carried more weight than sirens. The brothers had stolen from people who did not forget easily. And even behind bars, the fear of retaliation lingered. Prison walls offered some protection, but the shadows of the city outside were long and persistent, reminding them that their choices had far-reaching consequences. The psychological toll was immense. Mark and Jamie, once confident and daring, now faced days filled with reflection and regret. Each moment behind bars offered time to replay their decisions, to consider the chain of events that had led them from daring thieves to convicted criminals with a financial burden that might take decades to repay. The thrill of the heist, which had once been intoxicating, was replaced by the stark reality of confinement, the weight of accountability, and the knowledge that freedom had come at a price they could never erase. Even as they adapted to prison life, the memory of the raid and the loss of control lingered. The city outside continued on its usual course, indifferent to the fates of two men who had believed they could bend it to their will. Friends, family, and associates reacted in their own ways, some with sympathy, others with cold calculation. Mark and Jamie had learned the hard way that every action carries consequences, and every choice, no matter how carefully considered, can unravel in a single moment. By the time the sentencing concluded and the brothers were led away, it was clear that their lives had been irrevocably altered. Liverpool had witnessed a dramatic rise and fall, a story of audacity and error, of ambition and consequence. The £81,000 repayment and the prison sentence were not just punishments. They were symbols of the cost of greed, the fragility of freedom, and the unforgiving nature of both law and the criminal world. For Mark and Jamie, the heist that had once promised power and wealth had delivered only regret and constraint, a reality far harsher than any dream of fortune they had ever entertained. Time passed slowly for Mark and Jamie, each day a relentless reminder of the choices that had led them to prison. The walls were stark, the routines monotonous, and the world outside continued without pause. The initial adrenaline, the thrill of outsmarting both law enforcement and the criminal network, had long faded. What remained was the weight of accountability, the looming financial debt, and a profound sense of isolation. Prison was not just a punishment, it was a mirror reflecting every mistake, every misjudgment, and every moment of hubris that had brought them to this point. Repaying the £80,286 ordered by the courts became a daunting challenge. The brothers had spent the stolen fortune quickly, and much of it was gone before it could be hidden or secured. Lawyers, accountants, and prison officers explained the logistics of repayment, but it was not a simple matter. With no steady income and limited access to funds, every payment felt like a distant dream. Interest and penalties loomed, making the debt seem as though it would follow them long after they had served their sentences. It was a constant reminder that crime does not end when the heist is over, it lingers, persistent and unforgiving. Outside the prison walls, life moved on, yet Liverpool remained imprinted with the story of the stolen cocaine. People whispered about the audacity of the theft, the boldness of the brothers, and the inevitability of their capture. For some, it was a cautionary tale. For others, it was an example of ambition pushing beyond reason. Within the criminal world, the incident became part of the city's undercurrent, a story repeated in hushed tones in back alleys, bars, and underground networks. Mark and Jamie had entered the shadows boldly, but their fall served as a stark warning to anyone tempted to follow